Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Andy Menon. I'm back with another video series that I think is long overdue. So let's get started. So in part 1 of this video, I'm going to be talking about how to build a browser adaptable automation in the classic fashion. So what does classic fashion mean? It means that I'm not going to be using any enhanced UiPath features such as the object repository. And I'm going to tell you why. So this video is based on a real problem we had at work. And this is especially true in cases of significant number of attended automation users who are running these high stake automations in the enterprise, such as finance and billing. So let me talk about the timeline a little bit. So here's what happened. We went live with about 6 attended automations back in June or July of 2020. And then a month later, Microsoft puts out a bulletin saying that IE is going to go out of support in August 2021. And then just recently, we heard that Microsoft is totally retiring IE in the year 2022. So back in July of 2020, that put us in a real pickle because uh, we now had to adapt all those 6 attended automations to move from IE to Chrome. But at the same time, we were thinking, what happens if other browsers go out of active support? So at that point in time, we decided to build automations or modify existing automations that would support at least 2 browsers. And today, those browsers of choice are either Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge, the new Chrome Edge browser, or Chrome and Mozilla Firefox. But where I come from, we largely use either the new Edge or Chrome browser. So this video is going to cover those 2 browsers as part of the demonstration. So before I begin, why is it that I'm not using Object Repository? So back in July 2020, I still hadn't scoped what object repositories are, and we did not have a lot of time for experimentation and redoing a lot of this stuff. So the idea was to do it in the simplest of the manner in a way that everyone would understand. And one of the things that I came to know about object repository is that I still have to repackage and redeploy my automations. But I wanted to avoid that because it's not a good thing to redeploy your applications for minor reasons. If you have to really go through the change or the upgrade cycle, you really have to have a major change or a really, really valid reason. So this was not looked upon as a major reason. And then instead of having to play around with the object repository and then redeploy applications, I personally thought that we could train our attended automation users to to use their automations with more than one browser. And this is a big problem with attended automations because uh, the bot might be performing an attended automation routine at the same time in parallel as the human is working on that laptop. So if the human wants to use Chrome but wants the attended automation to run in Edge, the human user must be able to do that. And of course, we could use picture in picture and stuff, but the problem with that approach is we'll have to test it thoroughly and make sure that everything runs in picture efficiently. So with keeping that in mind, we decided to sort of enhance all our attended automations the classic way without having to go through enhanced UiPath features such as the object repository. Okay, so you're looking at my UiPath Studio environment, and I have a very simple application here. The functionality of the application is immaterial. You could replace this with any one of your applications. So you can see what happened there. The robot navigated to uipath.com. It highlighted the contact us link and then filled out the form. But in the last step, it actually filled out what browser it had chosen to run this operation. So now let me run this again and use a different browser. So when I ran the automations twice, you saw that I had put a deliberate step to highlight the contact us link. Now, you'll have to just keep this in mind for now, but I'm going to be coming back to this in part two. Okay, so I'm sure that most of the seasoned UiPath automation developers are familiar with this already. But if you're doing this for the first time and you're getting started, this might be useful. So let's look at the open browser action. So usually this is how we work on the open browser action and how we do things inside of it. So basically what we do is we put in a URL, and then when the page opens up, we want to do something with it. Let's say I want to click on a certain link. So I'm going to put in click, and I'm going to drop that activity here. So when we have open browser, one of the key attributes that we are going to select is the browser type, right? And oops, I made a mistake here. I'll put in. So the regular practice is you have a browser of your choice, and you choose what is called as the browser type. So you keep these values in mind. There are four standard values. One is, of course, the classic IE. Then there's Firefox, Chrome, and Edge. This is one of the selections you usually make so that your automations run in a preferred browser. So I put it in Chrome. And then if I come back to this click activity and then I want to click on something, I would go to contact us and generate a selector for this activity. Now let's go and check how that selector looks like. So I've saved the sequence and I'm going to run just this file and see how it works. Okay, so it works. So if I'm going to close out the browser and we are back in Studio. So let's take the selector out and pull it into Notepad and see how we could work with this selector and make it adaptable. So this is usually the pattern of an open browser selector. So if you're using open browser someplace, you have HTML app, the exe of the browser, and the URL that you're navigating to. And then, of course, you have the partial selector of that click activity that you're going to perform. Now, if you're going to attach yourself to an existing window, then the selector is going to be a bit different. And this is usually the pattern of an attach browser window selector. As you can see, there is a very minor difference between the two. The open window has the open browser window has the URL as the element, whereas the attached browser window has the title of the page as the attribute. So you can see that the exe name changes with the browser that you have selected. So That's the number one observation we can make. But that still does not solve the problem of setting the browser type. And the browser type is an enumeration. So how are we going to translate if the user says, okay, I want to use Chrome or Edge? How are we going to translate the string input of Chrome or Edge or Firefox into a browser enumeration type? And specifically, how do I set it as an attribute of the browser object? And here it is. If I go to the browser object, how do I set this? Because this is not a string, it's an enumeration. So for that, what I have done is I have a sequence, a component that I have built. It's not exactly a component, but a sequence that would allow you to enter the string name of the browser and will return you an enumeration. So for example, what I mean by that is if your input string is Chrome, then your output will be browser type Chrome. Similarly, if your input is Edge, it's the output is going to be browser type Edge. You see what is happening here. We are trying to develop a sequence that can actually adapt to more number of browsers that UiPath might add to the browser type enumeration. So tomorrow in the future, if a new browser comes up and the name of the browser is going to be, say, Red Moon, for example, fancy name. If it's Red Moon, then we should be able to automatically have this sequence adapt and return an enumeration type named Red Moon. So how do we do that? It's very simple. You'd actually take a string value and convert that into an enumeration. So I have the expression here, and this is how that expression looks like. And you can see that if you put in your browser application name, the enumeration that is going to be returned will match the input of your browser input name. So for example, in this case, it will translate to, so this browser app name will be substituted by string Chrome. And what you get out of this is actually browser type Chrome. Returns. So you get the idea. So if I replace this with Edge, it returns browser type Edge. So the sequence automatically adapts to the number of enumerations that have been added inside of the browser type enumeration in the UiPath.core library. So we have taken care of the most important thing is how to adapt the browser types on a global level to the kind of browser that you are going to be using in your automation. So next, how do we write a selector expression? The selectors are going to change based on the browser that you have used. So let's say that you were originally using Chrome, but now you want to change to Edge or any other browser. So if I take this selector here, this is a hard-coded selector. And if I want to change this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this with a variable, right? And then I'm going to next separate out the parent from the partial selector. So in this case, I'm going to say in selector, I'm going to put this as a generic variable in cell selector browser window. That becomes a generic selector. which means that if I put in Chrome, it would be replaced with chrome.exe. If I put in Edge, it will be replaced with msedge.exe. Or if I put in Firefox, firefox.exe. And then your selector for the contact us link would be the combination of the parent selector and this expression here. So in which case it's going to be plus. That's pretty much it. And you can see what's happening here. If I set this as an expression, the automation will automatically generate those selectors for me and then use those selectors in the browser automation. Now, the last thing that we have to deal with is the browser exe names. The quirky part of this whole thing is that if you take the browser named Chrome, its application name is chrome.exe. If you take something like Firefox, its application name is firefox.exe. You see there's a pattern there. Chrome, all lowercase, .exe would be the name of the exe. Similarly with Firefox, you have Firefox here, all lowercase .exe. But with Edge, that is not the case. So if I take the new Edge, it is msedge.exe. So we have a slight compromise here. In this case, what we will have to do is we'll have to come up with a conversion to accept the input and then transform the input into the exe without a specific pattern in mind. So you cannot generalize this because of the Edge browser. And I think even Internet Explorer had that problem. So what did I do to solve that problem? I put in a switch in here that accepts the browser name. And then if it is Chrome, then it would return chrome.exe. If it is Edge, it would return msedge.exe, and so on and so forth. So this is a slight compromise that we have here, and this might prove to be a problem, but in the mainstream applications that we have built, we have set the browser exe name as an external parameter. We do not do this conversion. This conversion has been put in here just for demonstration purposes, and you can understand how problematic this can become, because you will have to then add one sequence or one switch case for every new browser that gets added to the browser type collection. And you don't want to be coming in and doing that, because that defeats the very purpose of building browser neutral applications. So this is for demonstration purposes. What I'm trying to say is this browser exe name should be an input parameter. So when you run your automation, you should give it the input msedge.exe, firefox.exe, or chrome.exe. That means that your browser type conversions will be adaptable in the future, and your browser names will also become adaptable, because that's the only parameter you'll have to change in your automations. And we can train the users to do that, or we can go into the orchestrator and change the input argument to our automations pretty easily. So what is the end result of this change? The end result of this change is that your automations have become pretty adaptable uh, without having to go through a big code change. So before we conclude the part one video, let's take a quick sweep at the full application. So we start with the entry point main, and we have an input dialog where the user selects which browser that they would like to go with. And the input is a string, either Chrome or Edge. So the automation accepts this input and then invokes this sequence that actually converts the, the selection of the browser made by the user into the browser type and the browser exe name. So what we do in here is we pass it the browser app name, and then what this sequence returns is the browser type, enumeration, and also the browser exe name. And we just went through this sequence. And in the first part, the sequence actually converts the browser string to the browser type enumeration. In the second part of this sequence, I put in a switch case that will actually return the exe name. Now, remember what I said is this is not practical for the real world application. So instead of doing this, you might as well pass this value in as an input argument to your main entry point. So you might want to get rid of this when you actually implement your real world application. So I have two outputs, that is the browser type enumeration and the browser exe name. And once the automation has figured out what these attributes are, it's going to execute the actual functionality of this automation. So at the beginning of this video, we saw what that functionality was. So if I go in here, and you can see that the browser exe name has been inserted at runtime in the selector. So now this becomes a selector expression. So we briefly covered this. Let me go back to the notepad. Here it is. So this is another way of writing it, but I've used direct concatenation in the demo, but you get the idea. So this is the parent selector. Next, what it does is it takes the selector and then uses it as a parent of the partial selector that it's supposed to work with. In this case, what the automation does is it waits for this particular control to show up, the contact us link on this page to show up, because that's the signal for the automation to process the next step. So in this case, you can see this is a full selector expression that uses the parent selector expression plus the partial selector of that element, and then it finds this element and then uses that element to perform the highlight action and also the click action. So once that happens, control flows to the contact us page, and here again there is the selector for that window. It is crafted again based on what browser that you are currently using. So if I open this, again, there's the browser, and here the title changes. And that selector, again, that parent selector is again used to in the attach browser action. So if you look at this, the select attach window is used here. And then all of the actions are performed as usual. Remember, these are all child elements of the attach window browser. Therefore, they will run using the partial selector, and they are largely independent of what browser you're selected. So if you look at the selector here, there is no indication of whether the browser is Chrome or Firefox or Internet Explorer or what have you. So all of these automation steps are performed. Then the automation pauses for us to just catch a breath and look at the results, and then it closes the tab. So the next thing that I want to show you is the browser type enumeration. So if we open or go back to the open browser action, you can see that the browser type is actually an input parameter. Similarly, if we go down and look at the attached browser sequence, that attached browser sequence also uses the browser type enumeration as an input parameter. So what happens in essence is that your selectors automatically adapt to the browser that you're currently set for your automation. So before we close out this video and jump on to part two, I just want you to focus on this step in the example code. So you can see that I've used find element activity to actually find the contact us link and then stored it in a found element variable. Now, there is a reason for this, and I'm going to talk to you in detail in the second part, because doing things this way has a tremendous impact on how much time you're going to spend on testing your selectors, testing your automations, and also at the same time, how you're going to be contributing towards the efficiency of the automation. So that's all for this video, and I'll see you in part 2. Thank you.